Welcome, everyone. We're just going to wait a few more moments as people come in. Okay, let's get started. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our author talk this evening on behalf of the Ridgefield Library. My name is Lucy Handley. I'm the new Adult Programs Coordinator here at the library. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Books on the Common, for tonight's program. And now it gives me great pleasure to announce the introduction of Abigail Tucker, who's the author of Mom Genes, Inside the New Science of Our Ancient Maternal Instinct. She's a journalist, young mother, and a New York Times bestselling author, and a graduate of Ridgefield High School and Harvard College. She now writes for Smithsonian Magazine. Her new title, Mom Genes, was just published by Simon & Schuster and explores the biology and psychology of motherhood. Part scientific odyssey and part memoir, Mom Genes weaves the latest research with Abigail Tucker's personal experiences to create a delightful, surprising, and often poignant portrait of motherhood. If everybody could wait and put your questions in the Q&A, we will go over them at the end. Thank you very much and welcome, Abby.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to Books on the Common and the Ridgefield Library, and to everybody joining us tonight. I'm a journalist interested in all kinds of subjects, but I'm especially fascinated by the science of domestic life and by what you might call the mystery of the familiar. My first book, called The Lion in the Living Room, was about house cats' domestication over 10,000 years and the selective changes cats underwent that ultimately helped them conquer the world. My new book is called Mom Genes, Inside the New Science of Our Ancient Maternal Instinct. What do these subjects have in common? For starters, cats and human babies share certain key physical characteristics that scientists actually take the time and trouble to study. These features are called baby releasers in the scientific literature, and they include big eyes, a snub nose, round cheeks. Cats' accidental but striking resemblance to human young is likely one reason that they were able to take over the world without giving humanity too much in return. You could almost say that by so strikingly resembling human babies, our pets are preying on our maternal instincts. The other interesting connection is that house cats underwent profound but largely hidden brain changes over those 10,000 years as they became domesticated, which helped them lose their fear of humans and run roughshod over us, at least in certain households. My new book is again about brain change, but it is a more rapid brain change, typically happening in mothers over 10 months in the course of pregnancy, instead of over 10,000 years, like in cats. The 10 months of pregnancy may feel like 10,000 years to some of us, but that's a story for another time. Basically, if you take pictures of women's brains before and after pregnancy, they don't look the same. There are changes in gray matter and volume in areas related to social processing and in other spots too. One lab even found they can identify women who have been pregnant based on brain scans alone. These changes seem to be permanent. They may also be cumulative, deepening with subsequent children. Similarly sweeping kinds of changes are likely common across mammal moms of many species, from antelopes to zebras. But alongside this universality, there are many ways in which each human mother is unique, with no two mom brains looking or acting exactly alike. This physical brain change, which scientists are still trying to understand, is behind the abstract idea we call the maternal instinct. It's a sudden sensitization to baby cues and a desire to respond. It's a core pro-baby drive or motive. It's an awakening, a renaissance, an unmasking of a new identity, to use the words of one scientist. It's often chemically incentivized by the hormones of pregnancy, birth, and lactation, but it doesn't have to be. It's the most profound mental change outside of childhood, barring a traumatic brain injury. Our brains during the maternal period are plastic, changing, moldable as Play-Doh. Scientists consider motherhood a distinct stage of human development. Moms are in flux, a little bit like adolescence. Growing numbers of labs around the world are interested in this new field of mom science, and they use all kinds of high-tech tools that my kids would love to get their hands on. Why are moms so interesting for scientists to study? One reason is that the anatomy of the maternal brain is ancient and shared across mammal kind. So our instinct is a common thread in the nurture of all kinds of species. Scientists also hypothesize that maternal circuitry supplies the raw material for all sorts of fascinating and uniquely human social phenomena, like romantic love, female friendship, religious experience, altruism, lesbianism, language, music, obsessive compulsive disorder, and pet keeping. And there are other more practical reasons to figure out what's going on inside of mothers. Globally, 90% of women become mothers, and even in America, 86% of us are mothers by the time we reach our mid-40s. About 70% of moms are in the workforce, and since we're heading up more American households than ever, moms are important economic and political forces as well. But as the mother of 4 young children myself, I'm also interested in the scientific field for much more personal, and I guess you could say selfish reasons. Seen from the inside, becoming a mother is a very baffling and bewildering affair. The physical changes of pregnancy are alarming enough. You might gain 60 pounds practically overnight, or suddenly grow straight hair after yours had been curly for 30 years. And yes, there's a whole mini scientific subfield studying mom bods and dad bods and their psychological ramifications, but we won't go there tonight. Yet the interior aspects of the maternal transformation are even more striking and strange than what's going on our outsides. The brain isn't the first organ that comes to mind when you think about childbirth, but it's really a very key player. I wanted to know, why do I dream differently than I used to? Why do I not find the smell of my daughter's diapers to be disgusting? Why do baby cries feel like they're tearing my brain apart? Are there limits to this love that I feel? And in addition to wrapping my mind around the daily wonder of motherhood, I wanted to confront the downsides too. For instance, am I really getting stupider? Or am I just tired? Or is something else going on entirely? There are also major issues of maternal mental health to consider, which impact us and the moms we know. One striking piece of evidence for the concrete nature of the maternal transformation is how women's mental health disorders proliferate at the time of birth. Postpartum depression afflicts something like 1 in 5 women, and rates are rising, yet we still don't really know what causes this disease or how to treat it. Obsessive compulsive disorder impacts more than 10% of new mothers, and bipolar depression is also more likely to crop up around the birth of a first child. So it's not all sunshine and baby rattles. People's lives are at stake in understanding the maternal brain. I mentioned that I'm interested in the science of domestic life and in the hidden complexities of what at first seems ordinary. When I started reading the mom literature, in addition to all the nifty gadgets like high-powered microscopes, I noticed that many tools used in mom brain experiments are actually just junk from around my house. These researchers use stuff like popcorn kernels and remote control cars and dress-up costumes and Fruit Loops cereal and marshmallows and family photo albums and gel masks and endless plastic toys and even baby lotion. Tonight, I'll show you a bit about how scientists deploy the stuff in mom's pantries and closets and playrooms to get at the bottom of what's happening in mom brains. But first, there's one other important mom science tool you should know about, and it's something that I hope that I don't have in my house, I should say, rodents. Well, actually, I do have a pet hamster, but I'm hoping that that's all we've got right now. Because the maternal instinct is ancient and conserved across mammals, we can use animal models like lab rats and mice to get at some of what's going inside of our own skulls. For instance, I visited Robert Fromke's lab at New York University to see how his students try to probe the maternal circuitry in mice brains. Before they become mothers, female rats and mice really do not like babies. What they like is food. A lot of the junk food from our materials list just a moment ago is actually rat and mice treats. These animals love Charleston chew bars and Fruit Loops and super sweet stuff like that. Babies are not so sweet to them, on the other hand. A virgin female mouse will run away from the sound of mouse babies crying. And getting ignored is sort of the best case scenario for these pups. Sometimes female rats will attack the babies and even kill them. But just around the time a pregnant rat gives birth for the first time, a startling change takes place inside of her. Suddenly, she prefers pups to food. Classic experiments show that a new mother rat will press a bar seemingly infinite number of times to get rat pups. And these can be any old baby, not just pups from her own litter. In an early experiment, one mother rat pressed the rat baby bar nearly 700 times in 4 hours. And she just didn't stop until the scientist in charge threw up his hands and quit the experiment. Rat moms will also choose pups over cocaine. Suddenly, they'll cross an electric grid to the babies that they once ran away from or attacked. This is literally quite shocking to contemplate, but it also sounds eerily familiar to many mothers who had a similar epiphany in the hospital bed after giving birth. Labs like Fromke's look for clues about how the chemicals of pregnancy, birth, and lactation might facilitate this behavioral change and kick off the process of long-lasting brain growth that we see in human brain scans. For instance, Fromke's students released oxytocin, the swift birth hormone associated with labor and delivery, and also social bonding, into the brains of virgin mice who hadn't gotten pregnant yet. Over the course of 3 hours, they were able to watch the virgin's individual brain cells becoming sensitized, responding more sharply to the sound of pup cries. Through exposure to oxytocin, the virgin's brains acted more like mother's brains. And now, if you put these virgins in a cage with babies, it's likely that they wouldn't run away. They might even perform maternal behaviors like retrieving the pups. But the story is also far more complicated than the release of a single neurotransmitter. In real life, lots of other chemicals beyond oxytocin are also involved, like estrogen and progesterone and dopamine, which play off each other in ways that scientists are still trying to understand. And it's not all chemical priming either. You can also reverse engineer a mom without any hormones at all. Researchers in Fromke's lab are also studying how virgin mice can become maternal if you expose them to baby mice in a supervised, very supervised way for about a week. Given enough exposure, a once hostile female starts to respond to the pups. And rodent studies suggest that her brain is also transforming accordingly, gaining new receptors in key areas. The maternal instinct can be seen as a latent potential or a buried seed in every brain, even male brains, that with the right nourishment can grow. And this may be a little bit like what naturally happens with adoptive mothers. Back to rodents. Scientists are also pretty sure that they found what they call a central site of maternal behavior in rats, called the medial preoptic area. This deep down part of the brain, a section of the hypothalamus, receives lots of sensory information from places like the rat's ears and nose, and it's tethered to reward and motivation hotspots in the brain. This is how we know it's really important. New mother rats are so motivated to mother that you can render them unable to see or hear or taste, and they will still continue to care for their pups. But if you disable the medial preoptic area of their brain, these behaviors will cease. The moms will stop retrieving their pups and go back to munching the Charleston chews. We assume that similar deep down circuitry is involved in human moms when we process and respond to baby cues. But lucky for you and me, we aren't allowed to dissect human mom brains. Furthermore, human moms are not the same as giant hairy rats. Our brains are a lot larger and more complicated with extra layers. To study humans, scientists use a different set of tools. They use non-invasive imaging tools like fMRIs to watch how mom's blood is moving around inside their skulls, which gives clues to which specific brain parts are in play. And there are also electroencephalogram studies, which measure electrical readings on the scalp as mom's neurons fire en masse. An EEG cap is not something I had lying around my house, but I was able to try one out when I volunteered for some mom experiments in the 3rd trimester of my 4th pregnancy last year. In fact, that was one of the last things that I did in the winter of 2020 before the pandemic lockdown began. But even though it's a very different set of toys, the human experiments are actually pretty similar to the rodent ones. Much like they do with rats, scientists expose human women, mothers and non-mothers, and sometimes dads, to stimuli like baby cries and baby faces and watch what happens next. In one experiment, I looked at a bunch of pictures of sad, happy, and angry babies while pressing a button as fast as I could. The upshot is that moms respond differently than other people do, including our former selves before we became moms. When we see baby faces or hear baby cries, our brains respond more sharply, and we seem to use slightly different parts of the brain as well. We may stare longer or have stronger reactions to emotional infant signals, such as crying faces or screams. We seem to be more responsive to cries of pain. Of course, there are some major differences between human moms and rat moms. To rodent moms, as far as we know, all babies are created equal. But for human moms and some other animals, especially herd animals like sheep, that raise offspring in chaotic and crowded communities and not in snug underground burrows, we're also built to be especially responsive to our own babies. We need to be able to tell these kids apart so we don't waste our energy on somebody else's kid. In addition to becoming sensitized to all infants, a human mother learns to recognize her own infant's sight, smell, and sound very quickly. In sheep, this happens almost instantaneously, and scientists have a tough time mixing up lamb-like perfumes to trick these sheep mothers once they've got their baby's scent memorized. In humans, the learning is a bit slower, maybe taking a day or two, but it happens. In one fascinating experiment, scientists noted that women in a crowded maternity ward learned within just 48 hours to wake for the sound of their baby's cry only, and to sleep through the sound of those other screaming neonates. And in the lab, our brains light up in different patterns when we hear our baby's voice or see our own baby's face. Scientists call this maternal awakening, this newfound affinity for and responsiveness to infant cues, sensitization. Inside our brains, the chemicals of pregnancy, childbirth, and lactation are likely changing the way our genes are expressed, causing the appearance of new receptors on cell surfaces so that different zones start to fire and wire together. Our infant has become the star of our universe, the most fascinating thing in the world, way better than a circus peanut or even a Fruit Loop. Other things are going on with human moms as well. Scientists have noted that in late pregnancy and new motherhood, women, like many mammals, seem to undergo a dampening of our stress responses. We stay cool and collected during stressful events outside the lab, like real-life earthquakes. After a big one in California, scientists contacted their pregnant subjects and found that they reported less stress than other people. And in the lab, new moms don't produce as many stress hormones as other people do if you stick our hands in ice water or show us scary pictures. This natural dampening likely evolved to help moms focus on our babies when under duress, and maybe way back in prehistory to allow us to stay hidden from predators, and maybe also to facilitate breastfeeding, a vital process that involves sitting still for many hours on end. But critically, this dampening of stress and anxiety is coupled with maternal vigilance and a newfound awareness of our environments, including aspects like colors and sounds, and especially strangers' faces, anything that might pose a threat. And it's the combination of a chilled out state of mind and environmental hyper-awareness that gives rise to everybody's favorite mom behavior, maternal aggression. Moms notice threats and aren't afraid to face them. A moose mom will attack a bear. A squirrel mom will confront a rattlesnake. In the Serengeti on a reporting trip once, I watched a lone lioness face down a pack of 8 hyenas to defend her cub. And these predators eventually ran away. All the lioness really had to do was give them the stink eye. We've all run afoul of an angry mom at one point or another. Dairy cows are actually considered the most dangerous large animals in Britain, by the way, in large part because mother cows attack and sometimes crush and kill human walkers, especially walkers accompanied by dogs. In rats, scientists found that they can stop moms' attack behaviors by disabling certain oxytocin receiving areas of the maternal brain. And by giving extra oxytocin to human moms, you can enhance aggressive behavior when moms are confronted with a touchy-feely stranger in the lab who tries to touch a baby's cheek. Another favorite topic is mommy brain, whether moms in the course of undergoing the brain transformation get a bit stupider. The short answer is not really. Rat moms actually get better at certain tasks, like finding Fruit Loops in a maze. But what new mothers find rewarding and worthy of our attention is now a bit different. Granted, lost sleep is also likely in play, and new moms give up something like 700 hours in the first year alone. But there does seem to be a momnesia effect in matters of verbal recall. Moms aren't quite as good at remembering words. This may be because an impressive vocabulary isn't as important when you're caring for a 3-month-old infant. Interestingly, these effects seem to be cumulative. Mothers of 3 may be worse at verbal recall than first-timers. As the mother of 4 in the middle of writing a book, this was very bad news to receive. On the bright side, the neural differences between mothers of 1 and experienced mothers of multiple children are some of the best evidence that there is a permanent brain change in humans. And indeed, with the rat moms, mothers of 3 do better in mazes than first-time moms do too. So then after looking at all these common threads that connect mothers of all species, not to mention you and me, it's interesting to consider our differences as well. To me, the striking differences among human moms are just as interesting as our common responses. Moms are not robots set on cuddle mode. We are real people with personalities and pasts, and all this factors into the mothers that we become. Culture is one huge and obvious aspect of this. The maternal instinct is about a core pro-baby motive and drive rather than any one specific mothering behavior. And we know this because human maternal behavior varies so widely across the globe. There are certain animals, like rabbits, that have to ritualistically make a nest by tearing out the fur from their chest and thighs. And if you don't let them do this, they won't be able to care for their babies. Meanwhile, although pregnant humans have something a little like a nesting instinct, if you take away my Windex, I'm still going to carry on and be a mom. There are only a few fixed action patterns in humans. We use all sorts of different contraptions to stash our babies, and that's dictated in part by variables like climate and by hyperlocal expectations for what mothers ought to be doing with their downtime. We speak to babies different amounts. In some cultures, motherese, which is the official term for cute baby talk, doesn't really exist. We breastfeed for different durations or not at all. We sing or don't sing. We make eye contact or don't. Perhaps the closest things moms have to universal mothering behavior is left-sided cradling bias, our unconscious tendency to hold babies on the left, especially in their first few months of life. This is actually common across mammals of many types, with mothers swimming or galloping with the baby on the left. In one study, Russian scientists spied on walrus moms and their babies bobbing in the waters off a remote island in Siberia and found that the baby stayed on the mom's left. Ditto for flying foxes hanging out in tree branches in Sri Lanka. This left-sided bias likely has to do with the lateralized mammal brain and how we perceive our baby's states and emotions. In humans, holding on the left may better transmit information to the right side of mom's brains, where emotional information is processed. It also lets infants read the more expressive left side of their mother's faces. I find it literally impossible to hold a baby on my right side or to change a diaper if the baby's head is on the right. My husband and I had countless discussions about why this might be before I learned about the left-sided cradling bias. And while certainly women can hold their babies however they want, scientists are exploring a preliminary link between right holding and depression in mothers. One way that they study this is by leafing through mom's family photo albums, raiding mom's closets yet again. But beyond these very primitive behaviors, moms are really different even within cultures. Two moms on the same American block can have pretty different brains. In those scans of women's brains before and after pregnancy, scientists found that not all women changed to the same degree. They did find that a larger degree of change in gray matter predicted a stronger degree of maternal attachment to the baby after birth. In short, they could use a mom's brain scan to forecast aspects of her maternal behavior. I found this both fascinating and troubling. I became interested in some of the variables that influence why you are the type of mother that you are and why I am the type of mother that I am. Let me stress that women from all kinds of backgrounds and situations can be amazing parents, but these are just some interesting factors to consider. One type of study that caught my eye early on was genetic studies. These check to see if a woman born with a certain genetic variant in a gene that codes for an oxytocin receptor, for instance, turned out to be measurably more sensitive mothers. So I went to a lab in North Carolina where scientists observe mothers and children interacting in a space that's a bit like a fake living room. They use all sorts of other analytical tools, taking into account mothers' socioeconomic backgrounds and other personal variables. Genetic analysis is just one prong of the approach. But in this living room-like space, researchers use second-by-second video coding to scrutinize mom's interactions in a very finely grained and sophisticated way. Some weirdly familiar household materials come into play in these high-tech experiments, though. While mother and toddler are interacting in a lab, a researcher plays dress up, putting on a friendly ogre costume and entering the room to surprise the mother and the child. Or sometimes the researchers send in a remote control car disguised as a giant hairy spider. Then they sit back and watch how the mother and child react to this stimulus. These experiments are designed to slightly rattle the kid, but not the mom, so she can help the kid cope. Some moms ignore the kids, others overreact, and there's everything in between. Trained coders are scoring the mom's every move, rating her sensitivity. Then the lab collects a spit sample from each mom and uses simple genetic analysis to see if having one gene type or another predicts her behavior. Reading these experiments, I suddenly got very worried that I would have to get my own genes tested to see if I had the sensitive mommy or insensitive mommy gene, to grossly oversimplify these methods. But it turns out that this work is still in its infancy, and researchers have only found very weak relationships between specific gene variants and real-world maternal behavior. That's not to say that genes aren't involved and important. In fact, farmers and livestock scientists are at work now trying to breed supermom pigs and cows, as alarming as that sounds. But for animals and humans, it's not as simple as a good mom gene story, and DNA in general is only one poorly understood component of the variations that we see in maternal behavior. A human mom's environment is a much more established and easy to study mode of influence. There's only time for us to explore a few of these hidden forces tonight. I'm just going to list a few circumstantial factors, minor and major, that seem to influence maternal behavior to various degrees. So, did a mom babysit as a kid? How old is she? Did she bottle or breastfeed? Did she have a C-section or a natural birth? Was it an unusually painful delivery? Did she have a boy or a girl? How much money is in her bank account? What's her lifelong exposure to plastics and other chemicals? Does she work swing shifts? Is she single? Does her diet include a lot of fish? Speaking of fish in the diet, there's another study of animal of interest here when we start to get into the importance of mom's broader social worlds. That's killer whales, which are another one of those rare animals to have active and involved grandmas. Human grandmas, as we'll see, are a very important part of human mom stories. But whether or not your mom babysits for your kids today, there's some evidence that she is meddling in your parenting anyway. A mother's childhood relationship with her own mom can shape her behavior in hidden ways. It turns out that women who have good relationships with their moms may have more gray matter in certain areas of their brains related to mothering, one study showed. These women also seem to respond more sharply to pictures of their own kids during lab tests. Is this because maternal behavior runs in families? Scientists have done longitudinal studies over 30 years, following the same families over more than a generation as subjects who started out as young kids grow up and become moms. They often act like their own moms used to. What's behind these patterns? There's obviously some genetic component, but scientists have also explored other very interesting alternative explanations. Using lab animals like lab rats and monkeys, they switch around the mother-baby pairs. So the animal mothers raise foster babies who aren't related to them. It turns out that the young grow up to act like their adoptive mothers, not the biological mothers. It appears that the relationship is at least in part transmitted through experience rather than inheritance. It's possible that the physical interactions may lead to the enhanced expression of certain genes that in turn lead to sensitivity to hormones and bring growth. Or those same genes may be silenced by an animal's early life experiences. So to an extent, it's not the genes that you have that matter. It's how they get turned on or off by the nurturing you receive. On the opposite end of the spectrum, moms are also shaped by their children. Put simply, differences in children may account for differences in mothers. I know that my 4 kids would have reacted very differently to that ogre experiment we described earlier, which in turn would have shaped my behavior. Moms are silly putty to a certain extent, in tiny hands. This seems to be true even before birth. For a long time, researchers thought that pregnant women's level of arousal shaped the fetus's level of arousal. So if mom gets startled, the baby will sense that and startle inside her. But then scientists at Johns Hopkins University noticed that the pattern ran the other way too, with fetuses stimulating the mothers. To test this, the scientists used some of our other favorite household materials, popcorn kernels and gel masks. They put gel masks and noise-canceling headphones on the pregnant women so they couldn't hear or see. The scientists then snuck up on the pregnant women with tubes full of popcorn kernels, which they rattled really loudly right above their pregnant bellies. Only the fetus could hear this, and its response triggered a response in the mothers, changing their heart rates. Of course, some fetuses, just like kids, are more sensitive and reactive than others. Labs are now investigating how the unborn may already be conditioning their mothers to prepare for an active or calm child. There are many other aspects of the child that shape the mother, including child looks, the power of those baby releasers I mentioned earlier, which more or less constitute what we call cuteness, and intelligence and other factors. For example, moms make slightly more energy-rich breast milk for boys as opposed to girls, one study found. This sex-based milk production seems common across mammals. Milk cows, for instance, seem to make a greater volume of milk for daughters, which is something that dairy farmers probably like. But also key is the larger environment where mother and baby find themselves. A mother's social network and exposure to stress are vitally important. To study these influences, scientists often use monkeys, which have complex social relationships more like ours. Monkey work is where those marshmallows come in. Marshmallows are a favorite monkey food, as well as a favorite kid food, I found. I visited a lab at the California National Primate Research Center with its huge paddocks full of monkeys. And it was a little eerie because the monkeys' play equipment is exactly like the kind with the hollow plastic slides that you see at every daycare and playground. Monkeys also get pumpkins at Halloween, just like our families do. Scientists go to watch these monkey moms multiple times per week, keeping tabs on their behavior. They've by now identified certain factors shaping how a given mother acts. One is her proximity to her own mother and other female relatives. Even though rhesus macaque grandmothers don't go through menopause, the monkeys maintain very close and cordial relationship with their own moms and draw lots of support just from having her in the same enclosure. And let me just point out too that in humans, the importance of the maternal grandma might just be a global constant that rivals left side cradling bias. In cultures all over the globe, maternal grandmas safeguard their daughters' physical and mental health in the peripartum period, making them special foods to eat, and above all, offering social support, which can guard against many kinds of maternal health problems, including postpartum depression. Another monkey mom variable is her social status in the cage. Is she the alpha female at the top of the dominance hierarchy or at the bottom? These factors may make her more confident or anxious in handling her baby and change the stress chemicals in her blood or milk. Likewise, in humans, hierarchical differences like income inequality are sometimes associated with postpartum depression. Access to resources like food is another big difference. At another monkey lab in New York State, scientists use a device called a variable foraging cart to test how access to resources shapes maternal behavior. This wheeled contraption looks a little bit like a beverage service cart on an airplane, but it has a bunch of holes on the side for monkeys to reach their hands in and to feel for food amongst wood chips. This piece of highly specialized equipment did look like it might be handy to have around my house for parceling out the goldfish crackers and stuff like that among the 4 grabby kids. Anyway, in these science experiments, sometimes the monkey chow inside the variable foraging cart is easy to find, and sometimes it's harder to find. All the moms in these experiments ultimately get enough food to eat, and the ones with the hard to find food are attentive mothers, just like the ones with the easy to find food. But some of the moms don't know week to week whether they will get a hard or an easy cart. And among these moms, the ones who experience chronically uncertain conditions and never know what kind of food that they're going to be getting from week to week, attentive maternal behavior tends to disintegrate, and their babies even sustain physiological damage. For human moms too, resource uncertainty is very dangerous, and economics can have impacts on maternal mental health and behavior. I call this freakonomics. Events like economic downturns can lead to miscarriage, low birth weight babies, and even unexpected increases in SIDS deaths, sudden infant death syndrome deaths. Adverse conditions like stress and poverty, and even simple things like diaper shortages can be triggers for postpartum depression. Some scientists even think that postpartum depression is adaptive, a way of distancing a mom from her baby so she can move on emotionally and survive until conditions improve and she can pass on her genes to another baby. This is all a little scary to contemplate, but the good news is that as humans, we have a lot of collective control over our environment. We can make the world better for mothers. Scientists are developing new postpartum depression medications. And I visited a lab at Columbia University where they study postpartum and peripartum therapies. And that's how I ended up getting to listen to a meditation tape and getting a baby lotion massage, all in the name of science. If there are pregnant women out there, maybe you could volunteer for a relaxing experiment like this one. Some labs have even showed preliminary evidence that tools like talk therapy can change how a mother's brain responds to baby cues. But really, the best thing to do is to enhance the national environment for mothers before trouble hits by increasing their feelings of economic and social stability. Sound hard? It is. But core differences in support for mothers are likely one reason why postpartum depression rates seem to vary by country. The truth is that we've already collectively reshaped maternal behavior in profound ways. Through improved health and sanitation policies that drastically cut down infant deaths in the last century, we fostered the hyper-investment parenting strategy that we see on the playground today. In the pandemic too, we've also seen how maternal behavior responds to larger cues like stress and isolation, especially isolation from those aforementioned grandmas, and how dangerous that kind of loneliness can be for young mothers. We can continue to improve the world for mothers with financial and healthcare policy. For instance, other countries offer intensive nursing services for mothers that continue for weeks and sometimes for years after they leave the hospital. And one study found that paid paternity leave correlated with a substantial drop in the amount of anti-anxiety medications that new mothers needed, possibly because the mothers felt better supported. Above all, we shouldn't use the measurable reality of the maternal instinct as an excuse to leave new mothers high and dry, and to falsely assume that Mother Nature will take care of everything, and that moms are built to soldier on against all kinds of odds. The maternal instinct is quite real, but it is plastic. And like a lot of the plastic stuff we have lying around our houses, it can bend and eventually break. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. That was very interesting. Now, I don't know if everyone heard me say that if you have questions, you should type them in the Q&A. So please ask any questions that you have or comments. Anyone? No open questions. Well, how hard was it to write this? We had a whole family.
Yeah, the 4 kids throw a wrench into things sometimes. But you know, I had the good fortune of living in Connecticut near Yale University, which is sort of a hub for a lot of these kinds of experiments. The Yale Child Study Center is sort of the global authority on this kind of work, and that made it possible for me to meet up with some of these moms who are going into the lab and to watch them, to learn about these tools, which would have been really hard to do from a distance. And another thing is if there are moms in Ridgefield who are curious about this, I'm sure that with COVID restrictions lifting, that Yale will be looking for you know, moms to go into the lab and do some of these fascinating things, which is really one of the best things that we can do as moms and humans, because these experiments are hard to recruit for, and they're really safe and they're super interesting, but you just have to kind of make the effort to participate.
Good for you. Let's see what's in the Q&A. Oh, a comment. This is absolutely fascinating and so affirming.
Thank you. Yeah, I found it all to be super interesting, and it struck me that I really had never considered. I was a science writer with, you know, 2 children when I first heard about, you know, the fact that there was a developmental change involved with motherhood, and I really was kind of floored. And the more I learned, the more interesting it got, and I continue to learn, you know, fascinating things as new papers come out, and things that I really feel that moms should be told, you know, even in their OB visits about, you know, well, having a male pregnancy is slightly different for your body and brain than having a girl. I just didn't know these things. I didn't realize that, you know, having boys comes with it a lot of it brings with it a lot of extra health risks for mom, and even mental health risks. There's a rise, and yes, there's a rise. Women who are pregnant with boys are slightly more likely to have postpartum depression. And there's even more fascinating research about how the environment that we were talking about, like the huge importance of the world in which a mother finds herself, can sort of load the dice to whether or not you have a boy or a girl in the first place. We're sort of used to thinking that it's kind of a 50-50 proposition, a roll of the dice, but actually there's very well established evidence that shows that women who are really stressed out or sort of go through stressful events are more likely to have girls. For example, after 9/11, not just in the greater New York area, but nationally, there was a dip in the number of expected male births 9 months after 9/11. And that's actually a very common thing. And again, that's just showing how much of making their best play.
Wow. Okay, more questions here. Let me see. How much do fathers' brains change during pregnancy and after the birth of his child?
That's a really good question. So in the study that I was talking about, where they measured pregnant women's brains before they became pregnant and then after birth, and for 2 years after that, they were able to develop an algorithm that could spot moms based on brain scans alone. And that algorithm was not able to spot dads. So the change is not exactly the same. And it's a lot more variable. So basically, dads can go all the way from sort of not changing at all if they are, having no contact with the mother of their child and the baby. They don't change in the same way that a mom will. All the way to the other end of the spectrum, where there have been studies on two-father households that show that dad's brains can really start to resemble mother's brains if they're given this primary responsibility for the infant. And there's that reverse engineering that goes on, that even though this guy didn't necessarily give birth to this child, through intense exposure to the child, that maternal seed buried deep down in the brain just kind of starts to grow. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the differences that we perceive between the way moms and dads do things have to do with the amount of exposure that dads do have to the babies. And, just because of cultural reasons, there's a lot of disparities there. But even that said, there are differences that I don't think that experience can account for. Like, there's this fascinating field of research on microchimerism, which is when the fetus's cells cross the placenta during pregnancy into the mother's body and embed in her tissue, becoming part of her heart tissue or her liver tissue. And there's a lot of debate about what these cells are doing in your body for the rest of your life. But they found that the cells can also make it all the way across the barrier of the brain and become neurons. And so in moms' skulls, we have the cells of, our children, maybe even all 4 children are up there fighting in there. And that's not something that dads have. So the experience, I think, can be equally profound, but they're not identical experiences.
I remember hearing how Anderson Cooper was so upset that his little baby son started to walk and he didn't see it and his partner didn't tell him.
Oh my gosh. That's a fail.
Yeah. Yes, the conclusion that mothers need social support structures to thrive seems obvious. Are you aware of any public policy measures coming out of the studies you found that would improve outcomes for moms in the US?
It does seem obvious, doesn't it? And it's shocking. It was shocking to me to learn the amount of social support. I mean, I knew that Europe had, quote unquote, better social support, but what I didn't realize was that if you have a baby in some of these European countries, they'll do things like send a baby nurse home with you from the hospital for weeks to help you take care of the new baby and your other children and to run errands and all kinds of stuff. And in Australia, they have nurses that will keep tabs on new moms for years. And so in America, it's like you kind of get this one measly postpartum visit, and then you could just sort of drop off the face of the earth. And then it sort of becomes a very pediatrician centric kind of thing. So there's really big, expensive measures like that. But there was a really fascinating study done at Yale that showed that the number one environmental factor that correlated with depression in New Connecticut mothers was lack of access to disposable diapers. And so it wasn't like, food insecurity or relationship stress. It was this very simple thing that these women were stressed out because they didn't know where their next diapers were coming from. And there's all sorts of barriers to getting diapers if you're somebody living in poverty. And to me, that is a measure that is crying out for some kind of public action, that, treating postpartum depression, maternal substance abuse, all these things are devastating and incredibly expensive. And if we can use this research to head some of these problems off and to nip them at the bud, then that's, not only is it sort of the right thing to do, but it's also the economical thing to do.
Yeah, completely. Okay, next question. I'm an aunt and a stepmom, but had no children of my own. I found this very interesting. Oh, off topic, what year did you graduate from Ridgefield High? I was glad to hear you say that some things could be triggered in adoptive moms.
Yes, so I'm a class of 98. Whoa, it's a long time ago, graduate. Yeah, I think that the research on how mammals who have not physically gestated a child or given birth can nonetheless change and develop a maternal capacity is some of the most inspiring research that I came across, and how, there's actually a brain growth that goes on in these lab rats. In human moms, obviously we don't dissect us or dissect adoptive moms, but they found that given enough time, foster moms and adoptive moms start to physiologically respond to their babies, much like biological moms do. And so that is sort of a fascinating thing. And then the other thing that I kind of loved was this idea that the importance of nurture in early infancy. So the idea that any child that you take care of or choose to have a relationship with, whether or not they're related to you by blood, you are molding that child as a future mother, and you're even arguably molding generations of mothers just by choosing to have that one caring relationship. So I think that the science of adoptive moms is one of the coolest things.
Some of the connections between socioeconomic status, food access, etc., and postpartum anxiety disorders make a lot of sense. Were there any connections or findings that really surprised you?
I was really surprised that there's a public health scholar out in California who studies the relationship between economic downturns and sudden infant death syndrome. And I was really shocked by that, I can't remember exactly the statistics, but something like a small drop in the city's economy correlated with like a 5 or an 8% uptick in babies that suddenly died. And I was shocked by that. And I was also shocked by things about, how a military base announcing a closing would suddenly lead to an uptick in premature births in that area. I guess I wasn't quite as aware of how tuned into the environment moms really are, and how we're constantly absorbing and responding to these cues in ways that are not always, to us on the outside, they're not always happy stories, basically.
Mm-hmm. Another comment, behavioral psychology with the studies using mice have noted these maternal tendencies when this person studied psychology in the 1950s. You discuss all the loss of sleep that new moms experience. Should this be seriously studied?
Loss of sleep. Oh yeah, I think it should definitely be studied, and I don't think it can be underestimated. When we're talking about these, this is a very hot topic. This idea of, do moms lose cognitive capacity when they have children? And it's a very dangerous topic in a way. And I should here point out, I'm not sure if I explicitly said this in the talk, but one of the cool things about writing about this was that so many of the researchers on the cutting edge of this work are young mothers and even pregnant women, and they're making these humongous strides in science, and publishing all the time and working around the clock, and are certainly not losing their marbles or their ability to string two words together. But that said, this idea of whether or not there is a cognitive deficit occurs, particularly in the areas related to memory and especially verbal recall, is something that really scientists go back and forth about a lot still. And the studies contradict each other. But somebody did a study of, I think it was a meta-analysis of 20 studies where they kind of crunched all the numbers and saw if there was a trend. And the trend was that, yeah, moms are losing some verbal recall, and whether the cause is sleep or whether it's this contraction of gray matter that they see on the brain scans. I'm not sure if we know exactly yet why, but I think sleep is definitely something that is begging for more research, and also an important data point in why moms need social support so much. Because really, when you're falling down with exhaustion, it's easy to get frustrated and to push yourself too far. And if somebody else can kind of step in and help you, then you can save your resources for stuff that only you can really do.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Let's see. Let's see if there's any more in the Q&A. There's some in the chat. What are some of your favorite parenting / motherhood books you've read in your parenting journey? If you say that.
Oh gosh. So on the light side, I love, I'd say my favorite ones are Bringing Up Bebe and Amy Chua's Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. Those are sort of humorous memoirs that I think pack a lot of punch too. The idea of culture and parenting is something that I was very interested in, and I know that Pamela Druckerman, the author of Bringing Up Bebe, points out that in France, the parenting advice of, I believe it's Rousseau, is still taken very seriously. And she also points out that all 5 of Rousseau's children ended up in orphanages. So I found that to be a really kind of fascinating point that, there's certain, here we have Dr. Spock, or today Emily Oster, who I know and like very much. But in France, they're reading these other texts which shape, not just parenting philosophy, but probably aspects of national policy. So I love those 2 books. There's other books that really can kind of snap you out of the American parenting mode and really kind of make you think about what it would be like to parent, not just in a place that's kind of familiar to us, like modern France, but in a place where resources really are scarce, and where mothers are constantly faced with what to us would be unthinkable and hellacious situations. There's a book called Death Without Weeping, which is about life, but also a lot about mothering in very poor parts of Brazil. And it's just kind of stunning to imagine the things that people endure routinely, and that somehow we're built to endure, but that don't seem to really compute in our modern privileged mom minds.
Let's see, here's just a nice comment. These are important studies. The research is fascinating and hopefully will continue to be financially supported. Yes. Yeah. Does anyone have any more questions or comments? No? Okay then. Thank you so much, Abigail Tucker. Thank everyone for coming. And thank you very much to Books on the Common for co-sponsoring this program. Our next program with Books on the Common will be on August 11th. It's an author talk with veterinarian Melissa Shapiro about a small pink dog named Piglet, who was born deaf and blind and who has 250,000 Instagram followers. Piglet is valiant. I wish that I had a copy of the book to hold up. I do not, because I just started at this library and the book is out, but of course it's out. You can purchase Abigail's book, Mom Jeans, from Books on the Common. Thank you so much, Abigail. That was really interesting. And thanks
Thank
everyone
you.
for coming. Good night.
Good night.